Welcome, everybody. If you want a roller coaster and the roller coaster is turning upside down, you might scream, but you have this sense that you're being held. You have a sense that the roller coaster you're going to be okay because whatever turbulence is going through, it's being taken care of. And that's what we have to understand also. So when we're with God in the roller coaster of life, so when there's the twists and the turns and we're flipping upside down, we should feel okay. I don't want to be twisted upside down. This is really unpleasant. At the same time, God is holding me just as tightly as the rails of the roller coaster, and it's meant to get me to realize that He's holding me through every one of these things. That's the whole point of it.
Yes, absolutely. I'm on the same page.
So welcome everybody. Take the Baba Sheba talked about how important it is to have prayer in schools. Non-Jews should pray in schools. The public schools should have prayers. But if prayer in school is not getting through, at least we should have a moment of silence. And that's something to realize. A moment of silence is very important. It's a good thing to do, but it's kind of an emergency measure in the absence of the ability to pray. But I was just thinking, we all have busy days and stuff like that. We could take a moment here to a moment of silence, not as a formal thing so much. But we do have to remember to have what's the moment of silence about? The moment of silence is about just allowing ourselves to get to our inner tranquility. And when we come together to learn Torah, and Torah that applies to every single human being, then it's not about, okay, class, let's get going. We have to cover this material. This is an opportunity for all of us to sink inwards into our own awareness of what propels us and awareness of the divine, awareness of God Almighty. So we don't want to be coming in breathless, and so we want to be able to reflect. It's very interesting that it's in the laws of building a synagogue, Beis Knesset, which is literally a house of gathering. It says that you have to build two doorways, two entranceways, so that you have to go through the first set of doors and a second set of doors. Why? Because there's meant to be a pause and a time to a separation between that experience and the experience you just had, whatever was going on for you on your way to the synagogue. And so the same thing is over here. Here we are coming to learn Torah. And particularly when we're learning the Torah at the beginning of the book of Vayikra, which we're starting this week, which is the third book of the 5 books of Moses, we are reaching the central of the books. We need to say there's 2 before and there's 2 after. This is the centerpiece. Now, our experience of it is different. Why is that? Because the book of Genesis is these incredible stories of these great people, these great events in the creation of the world, and all these very riveting experiences that we've all had as humanity together. Then comes the books of Exodus with the descent into Egypt and slavery and the awesome redemption of the Jewish people and also the Egyptian people from exile and the whole world, and coming to Mount Sinai and the public declaration of God Almighty's divine guidance and blueprint for all of humanity, which until that point had been understood by a few, but now became a public mission and a public charge to reach the whole world. And then the building of the tabernacle. So we have all these, really riveting experiences. And at the end, we have the book of Deuteronomy. Moses is our teacher's impassioned plea to stay on track and not to go into idolatry and to go into the land of Israel and conduct ourselves properly. And we have before that the book of Numbers, book of Bamidbar, the 4th book, which is all these very, very cosmic battles between different personalities and different people, and the spies and Korach and Bilam and Balak and so on and so forth, and tremendous lessons. But when the middle in the book of Leviticus, Vayikra, it's a whole series of discussions about the sacrifices. Now that we have the tabernacle built in the big end of the book of Exodus, now we have all these sacrifices. And many people, their eyes just glaze over because there's no drama in this. And it's a lot of details of how the sacrifice, which animal to bring, what to bring if you can't bring this animal, what bird to bring, and if you can't bring this bird, bring this wheat, this grain offering. So our attention wanes. And so it's paradoxical that our attention wanes from the centerpiece of the Torah. And it's very interesting because if you were to show somebody a scene, everyone wants the drama. Everyone wants the, you were to make a play. Everyone wants the drama. The opening act, the middle act, the end act. Imagine if we put in an act in the middle of a play where the characters were just sitting around, tranquil, looking at the ceiling of the theater or the stage, and everyone would be the audience would be fidgeting. They'd be like, what's going on? Where's the action? What's going to happen next? There must be something that's going to happen. There must be, what kind of plot line is this? So, and some people would probably get up and go ask for a refund if they figured it was going on for too long. Everyone wants to see the running and the drama and the conflict and the resolution of the conflict. But here is the real centerpiece. The real centerpiece of all these things we're doing is to get to that place of tranquility. And the process of tranquility, of reaching tranquility, is we first have to acknowledge that we are human beings. We are created as human beings, as intentionally created by God Almighty in His divine image, as imperfect human beings. So we have lofty aspirations. We all know everyone has lofty aspirations. But the reality is we fall short, and we fall short again and again, and on many, many different fronts. And if we're not aware of our shortcomings, then other people are going to make us aware in very bold ways, either through some heated conversation or some cold shoulder. But it's going to be made evident to us. So the book of Leviticus is describing the process of coming close to God Almighty. Coming to that place of recognizing our humanity and being okay with it, and knowing that God Almighty is lovingly and patiently welcoming us back to our own awareness of how close we are to God Almighty and how inseparable we are. So the animal sacrifices we're going to learn about are really a recognition of that, of taking time out of our daily hectic cycle and saying, I made a mistake. I need to do something to bring myself back into line with the way I'm meant to be. And that's something that's completely accessible to all of us. Now, the fascinating and beautiful point to bring it over here. So if we go to chapter 1 of the book of Numbers, of the book of Vayikra. If I say Numbers, I'm so sorry. Leviticus, book of Vayikra. Look at chapter 1, verse 1. It says, Vayikra el Moshe. God Almighty is calling out to Moses, our teacher. And he's calling out to Moses, our teacher, as the one who's going to show the way for all of humanity. Meaning to say, this calling out is not just for Moses, our teacher. It's not just to Moses, our teacher. It's to each one of us. So when we realize how human we are, we might be tempted to think that we are completely irrelevant in this great cosmos. And especially when we recognize that our humanity, our frailty, and the mistakes that we make are something that is emphasizing our humanity, then we're going to say to ourselves, what would a perfect being and omniscient and omnipresent and all-powerful being have even the slightest interest in the ups and downs of my life? And the answer is in the first words, Vayikra el Moshe. And he, being God Almighty, called out to Moses, our teacher. That God Almighty is initiating this conversation. He's not a busy administrator that you're in grade 5 and you took an extra thing that you shouldn't have taken from the lunchroom or from the supplies box, and you feel guilty about it. So you're going to go knock on the principal's, the superintendent's door, and you're going to say, come and offer him some sort of, story of what happened. Hope you don't get into too much trouble. But the superintendent is very busy. He's attending to other things and far more important things than whether you took this item, you took the pencil, or you stole an eraser or something like that. That would be a human situation, but God Almighty is the one initiating over here, and in every situation, He's the one who's initiating. He is seeing us and seeing that we are perceiving ourselves as distant because we didn't live up to our expectations. We didn't live up to what God Almighty is expressing we're supposed to be doing. He's the one that's reaching out to us. He's calling to us. It's like that superintendent or the principal calling out to you and saying, "Oh, I know you want to speak to me. Come to me. Come. I'm calling to you. Come. Let's talk about this." Think about the loving warmth that you would experience. That the principal, he knows exactly what you did, and he's calling to you to be able to have this conversation. That is what our relationship is with God Almighty. That's what every human being's relationship with God Almighty is. That voice calling us is constantly calling us. And the greatest problem that leads us to transgress, the only problem that leads us to transgress against what is meant for our best well-being, is when we feel separate. It says, Taivas yivakesh nifrad. Pleasures, the pursuit of pleasure, is sought by the person who is separate, who perceives himself as separate. That sense of separation is the very source of the problem. If you walk around feeling that God Almighty is lovingly recreating you every instant without any strings attached, complete unconditional love, hugging you is beyond, is a minimalization of the experience. He's completely in every part of your existence, bringing it into existence at every moment. You wouldn't even think of doing anything that would be considered a transgression. Why? Not merely because God, you would know that God Almighty is here with you and He sees everything you're doing, so that would never even enter your mind. But what propels the need to do something, to fulfill a drive, to do something that's going to be, what's propelling us is the desire to do something to fulfill a sense of lack. And the only lack that really exists is the sense that we're not connected to God Almighty. If we have that certainty that God Almighty is with us, we won't feel any lack in the world. We won't feel any lack for any pleasure, any experience. So the real driving force is this feeling separate. Now, a person falls under the spell of the idea, the innocent, mistaken idea that he is separate from God Almighty, or God Almighty is not really with him completely, and he does something that's inappropriate. What happens immediately as part of that process, and immediately afterwards, and continuing afterwards? A person it drives home that feeling of separation. I can't believe I did that. And a person feels even less worthy and more separate from God Almighty. So what has just happened over here? The problem is spiraling downwards. A diversion in thought from knowing that God Almighty is completely with me and investing me the complete 100% power to make the right choice all the time, is that diversion from that certainty now led me to start to feel I need something, to go grab for something in the world. And I grabbed for it. And now I feel even more separate. So God Almighty wants to drive home that point, the following point. You were never separate in the first place. That is a mistake in your thinking. You took seriously the idea that you're separate from God Almighty. Number one. And number two, you did not become more separate in reality than through whatever you did. You're going to feel more separate. You're going to feel that you're going to feel there's some sort of iron wall between you and your creator. You're going to feel stymied. You're going to feel stuck because that's a compounding feeling. But it's completely unreal. And who's doing the calling first? God Almighty's calling us at every second. So our responsibility is to relearn, like King David says, that teach me your ways, teach me your paths. He says to God Almighty. When we grow up, our parents are supposed to model for us, ideally, love and compassion and proper restraint and discipline and so forth, all the different elements. And if we were to have perfect parents, we would say, wow, I understand God, because this is God sending these emissaries to raise me, and this is what he's like. But the challenge is they're also human beings. So they'll have little things that could be big things, but everyone is doing something as a human being. And the end result is we get the wrong message. If we see a parent, for example, get frustrated at us for an extended period of time, we think that that's the model for how God is. If God is sitting there in his chair in the living room, frustrated at us for a significant period of time. And it's kind of like only through passage of time, maybe a day goes by and a different day and a different situation, and then the atmosphere in the home starts to lighten up again, and then things kind of return to normal. That is what we're stuck with. And no matter how far we advance in life, how much Torah we learn, we're still very possibly living in that impression. So our job is the journey of life. Once we are propelled out of our parents' home in progressive stages, which include leaving the house, getting married, the parents at some point should live to 120 to pass away. A person has to be developing at every step a greater and greater understanding and awareness of his own relationship with God Almighty. And we also have to know that this applies across the board in everything that we're doing. So we can be very focused on the big transgressions, and either person says, I don't do that, I'm free of those things, or maybe he does stumble in those areas. But often gets overlooked is the nuanced and even very brief diversions from our sense of connection to God Almighty. So we've discussed in the learning together that getting angry is idolatry. Why is it considered idolatry? Because it's seeing the person that's infuriating us as an independent being who is causing a situation, and God is not in the picture, so therefore I'm angry at that person. Now, if I get angry at somebody, if I'm worried about what they think about me, and that's my motivation, then I'm not really changing the situation. I'm not really changing myself. I'm just trying somehow to get the situation back into the calm waters afterwards, because no one likes being angry, someone being angry at them. Now I have to say, I'm really sorry about getting angry. But what's the real problem? The real problem is I lost sight of that God Almighty is creating and running everything in the world at every instant. And the level of subtlety can be so subtle that maybe instead I won't say an angry word, maybe it'll just be my tone of voice. Maybe it'll just be my body language. Maybe it'll just be the speed at which I speak. Maybe it'll be my look in my eyes. Maybe it'll be the way I'm breathing. And it's coming across this frustration, this anger. So what's our natural response when that's something like that happens? If we're the one who gets angry, the other person is upset that we got angry. We're like, why are you making such a big deal of it? Why are you making such a big deal of the fact that I got angry? It's over. But what it really represents is that in that time, there was a diversion in my thinking. I was not thinking I'm connected and everything around me is connected to God Almighty. So the end result is, it's really a reflection of something that's supremely significant. It's supremely significant, and the other person is picking up on that, even though they can't justify their they're going to struggle to try to justify why they're saying they're so hurt by the anger. But the reality is, what's really bothering them is the fact that the person who got angry exhibited this diversion in thinking. That's what's really disturbing. So how do we now look at this? Now we see ourselves, okay, so now we understand that this is a constant process. In every detail of our thinking, every detail of our speech, and every detail of our action, we are amplifying very, very subtle diversions in our thinking. They get amplified so that by the time they come to action, they could be completely blown up. So I have a small diversion thinking thing that God Almighty is not with me and not with us in the world. And now this person upset me. Now my action is I'm not going to call him for a period of time. I'm upset at him. So that's it. That's having impact on the world. So God Almighty is describing here in the book of Leviticus, what is the process that we can know and we can repair these diversions, these particularly the inadvertent mistakes. Now, if we have a rupture between us and another person, we have to go and repair that with the other person. We can't suffice to say, God, I'm sorry, and so forth. That's really sorry, because the diversion in thinking is between us and God. But the consequences of our diversion in thinking, that we affected this other person in a way that was disturbing to them, requires direct contact to apologize to them for the outward expression, the outward consequence of that diversion in our thinking that took us from knowing that there's nothing besides God Almighty. So in this Torah portion, the Torah portion details numerous offerings. We have the offerings of different purposes, different types of offerings. We see that the ascent offering here in end of chapter 1, after, if a person can't bring a more expensive item as an animal, then he could bring a fowl offering, a bird, pigeon, or a turtle dove. And then if he can't afford that, he could bring a grain offering. I mean to say, this is open to every single human being. There's a korban oilu, there's actually a korban, there's a sacrifice that can be brought by non-Jews also. And the korban can be brought, this sacrifice can be brought, this certain type can be brought by any human being. There's different issues with bringing it today, even though a non-Jew is not obligated to bring his sacrifice in the holy temple, and he's not, so therefore it's not limited by time and space issues of the lack of the holy temple being built at this moment in time. But he is, because he has to give certain portions to the priests, and the priests are not in the business of accepting those today. It puts everyone in humanity in a quandary. So even a non-Jew is still stuck and not able to bring this sacrifice. But we do have other aspects that can accomplish the same things as bringing sacrifices. There's fasting, it's giving charity, and prayer. And today, fasting has been supplanted mostly by giving charity, because of the weakness of the generation. People are not able to sustain themselves to be able to be functional while they're fasting. But the point is that we take all this together, that we're not really stuck. While we don't actually bring the animal sacrifices today, the fact of the matter is we do have the same access to God Almighty. And a sacrifice is not necessary in order for you to accomplish that atonement. Sacrifice is not necessary for that, because God Almighty has structured the creation in such a way that it's possible through prayer and through the process of tshuva and prayer and fasting and charity. Now, one of the offerings I just want to bring out here, and we'll then we could take some questions, is if you go to chapter 4, verse 13, it discusses a sacrifice that has to be brought, a sin offering of the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin is the highest court of law, and it's actually sits in a part of the Holy Temple. And what happens if this high court, made up of 71 great Torah scholars, makes a mistake, and they say something that is forbidden is actually forbidden? They make a mistake and say it's permissible. And we see from this that there's no such thing as infallibility in Torah. We have immediately preceding that, what happens if the high priest makes a mistake? And we have immediately after the case of the court making a mistake, we have the sin offerings of a leader of the Jewish people. So it is built into the Torah's entire blueprint that mistakes will be made by every human being. And that's something that's very, very challenging for people who are brought up in traditions that talk about infallibility. Because it's tempting to believe that there's a human being that always gets it right. It's reassuring. Why is it reassuring to believe that someone else gets it all right? Now, I know I'm human and I make mistakes. But why would it be to my advantage? Why would I feel a sense of relief if someone was always getting it right, was perfect, never could make a mistake? The reason that is something that's so tempting is because it would absolve me of responsibility. Because so long as everyone is possible to make a mistake, then I have to be constantly aware of making sure and checking that my thinking is correct and that the person who's the leader or the judges, that their thinking is correct and what they're saying actually matches up with the reality of God Almighty's divine blueprint. That is, I have to be constantly on guard. I have to be constantly on my toes. I have to be constantly well-versed in learning to make sure that things are being said correctly. But if someone's infallible, there's no such responsibility. Because he has the responsibility to say what the truth is, and he's not going to make a mistake. So all we have to do is nod our heads and to agree and go with the flow. Everything's going to be perfect. So comes along God Almighty and says, no, it doesn't work that way. You have a responsibility to protest and challenge something that's wrong when you see that it's being done wrong. You have a responsibility to scream out you're making a mistake. In fact, this goes to such an extent that the way it works over here is if the court makes a mistake and instructs the Jewish people to do something inappropriate, and the people go ahead and follow them, the majority follows the court, then the people are absolved of the responsibility to bring the sin offering, and in fact, instead, the court brings the sin offering. But if there's even one student who perceives that the deliberations of the court are going in the wrong direction, and he screams out, "Toyimatem, you are making a mistake," to this august body of Torah scholars and sages. If he screams that out and they ignore him and they go ahead and they make the wrong decree, guess what happens? The court can no longer bring an offering, one, so to speak, offering to cover everybody. Now it's the obligation of every individual to bring his own individual sin offering. Now, why would that be? So the court still went ahead and made the mistake. But this offering is called the Par Helam Dover. Par Helam Dover means to say the cow of the concealed matter. So it makes sense that if the 71 judges made the mistake and all the people didn't know any better and they all went along, that who's responsible is the court, and they have to, the Sanhedrin, they have to bring this offering, and then they resolve the issue for everybody. But if one person screams out, "You're making a mistake," then everyone has to bring their own sacrifice now. Because there's no longer a stupor. There's no longer a stupor over the people. Someone warned the people there's a mistake. Someone warned the judges there's a mistake, and they went ahead with it anyways. You can't blame the leaders anymore. So now everyone's responsibility. So you see that the responsibility shifts from one person saying you made a mistake. And it says that if a person knows that they're making a mistake, let's say he wasn't there at the time of the decision, but he hears their announcements, so it's too late to call you're making a mistake to break up this decision. But he knows and he decides he's going to listen to the rabbis and do what they say anyways. Then he has to bring a sacrifice. He can't rely on the sacrifice of the court. Why? Because what kind of sacrifice could he bring? These are sacrifices for making a mistake. What mistake did he make? He knew they were wrong. He did it anyways. So where's his mistake? His mistake is he made a mistake in understanding the obligation to listen to the words of the sages. Because the obligation to listen to the words of sages is not when they're making a mistake. So each person has to take this responsibility. And everyone wants to shirk it. Oh, there's much greater rabbis than me. And some people will be watching this and say that they're not even a rabbi. Maybe they don't even know how to read the verses of the Torah. But it's still everyone's responsibility. And it's particularly a responsibility of the Jewish people because it says that it's an inheritance for the Jewish people, meaning to say, just like if I have an inheritance and there's 10 brothers and I'm one of the brothers and the father gives an inheritance, I have to take this as my inheritance. I'm not going to let one other brother just, run the whole show and make all the decisions. No, I've got to treat it like it's my inheritance. I gotta make sure that I take responsibility for it and it's being run properly. And similarly, a non-Jew has to realize that the whole world depends on getting this understanding of a blueprint right. If you see that a rabbi is making a mistake, you have an obligation to say, Rabbi, don't we learn this or that? And you have to be persistent. Rabbi, what is your source? And that's why those that sign up at rabbismith.org, in the mutual understanding that we have, for those that sign up to be leaders, and either Zecharia 23, the non-Jewish leaders, or the Raya Mehamna Shliach 2.0 for the Jewish leaders, says there specifically that your obligation is to hold me accountable and hold me in integrity. And it's a great honor when someone sends me an email saying they want to hold me in integrity because they think I'm saying something or doing something that's different than what they think I should be doing. Why? Because it's a sign that as a teacher, I'm teaching properly. Whether we can have a discussion whether or not they're accurate or perceiving things correctly or not, and whether I should change my course of action or not. But the fact that they felt compelled to say something is an indication that they got the message, that the teacher is hitting the mark in terms of raising those that come to learn and study God Almighty's wisdom to that they've got the message that they're supposed to be challenging and pointing out things that don't look right. So whose responsibility is it to make sure that the students scream out? We said before, if one student is walking and hears they're making the determination as the court, and he sees that it's a mistake, he has to scream out, "You're making a mistake!" Whose job was it to teach him that and to implant in him the spiritual compass to see that it's a mistake and the spiritual backbone to scream out in public when everyone is laughing at him and mocking him, and who is he anyways? He's a nobody. He doesn't even know anything because he's not even a member of the court, and he's not even one of the top students of the court, and maybe he's not even admitted into the building of the court for the deliberations and discussions and the decision-making process. But his teacher taught him that the whole world is dependent on him screaming out, "You're making a mistake." So this is the message that we have to get out to the Jewish people and to all of humanity. This is the Torah's message. The Torah's message is that the responsibility for the authenticity of the God Almighty's divine blueprint for all of creation is the responsibility of anybody who hears something that's not correct or sees things being said that are not correct. You have to say, "You're making a mistake." Now, you may want to choose appropriate language, how to express that. In the case of the Sanhedrin meeting, it's a large hall and there's no system for this person to be heard. So he has to scream out, "You're making a mistake," so the whole assembly hears him. By extension, the entire Jewish people hear him. But if you're in contact with him, you have to come to the rabbi and say, "Rabbi, can you explain to me what your source for this is? Can you explain to me why you're doing this thing that seems to contradict the Spirit of God, the will of God, the God, the dinim? It seems to be contradicting the ways of our teachers, the ways that the sages of all time have conducted themselves. It seems to be contradicting the facts." That's your responsibility. That's what the Torah is teaching us. And that, my friends, brings us full circle. Because this is the real test of how much do we really believe that we're connected to God Almighty and that He's with us at every second. If we really believe He's with us, then we could trust that He's going to inspire us and show us the right direction and show us the right things to say, when to say it, who to say it to, and we won't be afraid to say it, no matter how. If everyone rejects us and ignores us, and the court, the Sanhedrin ignores us, and all the great leaders ignore us, and everyone around them ignores us, and everyone ignores us, or worse than ignores us, says you're doing the wrong thing. How dare you say you're making a mistake to these wise men? That is our urgent obligation. The whole world is depending on that, because one slight diversion in my thinking is going to lead me off into transgression. Imagine if the centerpiece of the people that have the responsibility for setting the direction for the world of spiritual matters, and that's all physical abundance and physical matters flow from the spiritual matters. Like we say, physical slavery flows from first having spiritual slavery, and the physical freedom from slavery flows first from having freedom from spiritual slavery. So that's dependent on connecting to God Almighty, and the guidance to how to connect to God Almighty is contained in the Torah. So if someone's teaching the Torah wrong, it's leaving people enslaved, leaving people in the dark. So our job is to see that the greatest expression of our certainty that we're connected to God Almighty, and that nothing can separate us from Him, and that to think that we're separated is a mistake. And if we did something that was acting out on thinking that we were separated, He's calling to us to come back to Him, to recognize that we were never separated in the first place and not separated now. That the ultimate expression of that is the ability to stand strong on saying what's right no matter what's going on around us. And on the contrary, the more we feel that we are alone, the more it's an indication that we are on the right track. Because if you are, now when I say alone, I don't mean alone vis-a-vis God, and we're not really alone from the other people also, because the other people wish they had the courage to have these insights and to share them. But when we feel that there's no one, let's just put it, no one's echoing us. That's what I mean by alone. I didn't mean we're not alone, but when we feel that we are the only voice, then that is a sign of how much we are connected to God Almighty. If you find yourself drawn to going with the flow, you have to ask yourself, is that because I'm eager to be relieved of the responsibility? I'm eager to be going with the flow and let other people make the decisions and have this wishful thinking that there's somehow they're infallible and they thought it through and figured it all out. Now, I just want to add one point over here, and then we're going to take questions and conclude. In all this discussion about independence, independent thinking, fierce loyalty to God Almighty, willing to stand on one side of the world and the rest of the world's on the other side, like Abraham, our father, did. This must be then done in the context of tremendous love for our fellow human being. To love your fellow as yourself is and the general principle of the Torah. So the fierce loyalty to God Almighty comes hand in hand with the fierce love for every single human being. Even though they're not echoing your voice, even though they're not agreeing with you, even though they're hurling at you accusations and say, you still have to love them. And you still have to look for ways in order to express that love and look for ways to express unity with those people. Now, when I say unity, that does not mean compromising anything you're doing. But it means that if you're going to go to a synagogue, don't sit in the back row and say, all these people are, whatever you have your opinion about them. No, you got to go sit right in the center of them and know that the way to change the direction of this entire place and the way to change the direction of the entire world is to lovingly sit in the middle, participate, and set a new tone, set a new direction. And it says that a chassid is a person who's mischassidim kainer. He goes above and beyond with loving kindness for his creator. He creates an environment around him. He will create an environment of loving kindness, an environment of enthusiasm for God Almighty, and an environment of unwavering commitment to the truth and the truth of the Torah, and the truth that there's nothing besides God Almighty. And I saw today a sikha from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, a talk from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, where he said, even if there's only one person in an entire nation, one chassid in an entire nation, he has the ability, the God-given power, to turn the entire nation into chassidim, meaning that it should be a chassid, Hasidic. What's the best? How would you say it? Hasidi it should be a place that everyone is a chassid. And what do we see? It says, how do we refer to a human being who's completely a non-Jewish human being who's completely committed to God Almighty, does the commandments because God Almighty loving them gave them on Mount Sinai through Moses, our teacher, and he fulfills them for that reason. He's called Chasidei Umas Elom. Chasidei Umas Elom means to say he's one of the dedicated nations of the world, one of the ones that goes above and beyond the nations of the world. So each one of us and each one of you watching has the ability, if you get this point, do not fall into the trap of so many people today that write people off. All these people are half asleep. All these people are like this. All these people are fully asleep. Whatever. Go on and on. But write everyone off. What? That's not godly talk. That's not Torah talk. Torah talk is, I can't tell you what's up with those people. It's not really, I don't need to get into that. All I know is this is the way we want everyone to be. The energy that we have. And then with enthusiasm, we draw everyone and it spills out onto everyone around us, and everyone else starts to act with that level of devotion and dedication to God Almighty. That's what we're supposed to make. Our act of being a chassid, that unyielding, unwavering connection to our Creator, is what makes the entire place around us have that same unwavering connection. Everyone will be chassidim u'maselim. That's an act of love for our Creator and an act of love for our fellow human being. So the greatest independence puts a person into the greatest direct line of God Almighty's direct, experiencing God Almighty's direct love and seeing that in every single human being, and then being a conduit for that to lovingly approach every single human being and draw them close to the service of God Almighty. And that's how we combine the two. That independence, but the independence is taking us to becoming the greatest beacon of light and hope for every single human being. And that, my friends, is the exact way the coming of Mashiach is going to unfold. And it's in the hands of every single one of us to accelerate that by completely putting aside our own reservations and concerns and am I and who and what are they going to say? And maybe there's a point that who am I anyways? And all these things are all true. But that's not going to faze me. And that's what I'm saying to you also. Don't let it faze you. Those are all just internal turmoil, noise making inside of our heads. And then we look for things in the world to try to support it. No, ignore all that. Just deny it. It's irrelevant. Be here, be happy. We're tonight Rosh Chodesh Nisan. This is the new moon of Nisan, coming from the month of Adar, the great joy of the highlight of Purim and the increasing joy even after Purim, coming to Nisan, the month of great miracles, Nisim, miracles and miracles, the God Almighty taking the Jewish people out of the spiritual bondage and the physical bondage of Egypt, and in the process showing the entire world that they also are meant to be out of spiritual bondage and physical bondage, and they were all meant to go together to serve God Almighty with one unified shoulder of dedication to serving God Almighty, becoming Mashiach, and in complete and true redemption now. Any questions?
Rabbi, you talked about screaming out, you're doing it wrong, or no, that's not it.
You're making a
mistake. Yeah.
Toyim atem.
You're making a mistake. So how does somebody do that while guarding the tongue? And who is the audience? Is it just the 71 judges of the Great Sanhedrin, or are you talking about also a wider audience? And how do you do that while guarding the tongue?
Well, there's nothing that says in the guarding the tongue that you can't tell people that they're making a mistake. Meaning to say, there's multiple things over here, but the key is like this. First of all, to your first point, it's much broader than the court. The act of speaking up towards the court in the presence of the court will be heard, it will reverberate around the world. So this person might, when he said Toyim atem, why does everyone in the whole Jewish people now have to bring their own sin offering? Because he broke the spell. They were now all on notice that they had to investigate this for themselves and realize that the court's making a mistake. So clearly it's meant to reach more than just the judges. They can't let the judges just sweep it under the rug. Number two is, guarding our tongue is about speaking against a person, to speak evil about a person, to speak negative things about a person that are not relevant, to bring up a person's past, present, or present indiscretions that are not relevant. But when someone is in a position of leadership or presenting himself as a position of leadership and he's making a mistake, you have an obligation. It's a matter of saving the spiritual and physical lives of the people to declare and scream out, you are making a mistake. And if it's propelled by love, love of God Almighty and love of your fellow man and love of this person himself and love of all the people that are following him, then it is going to have no possibility of veering off into some sort of, attempt to just drag him down or degrade him or speak negatively of him. Any other questions?
I have one more. So somebody told me, since you're talking about sacrifices, somebody told me that, well, obviously non-Jews can bring sacrifices outside of the temple, but somebody told me that the prohibition for Jews of bringing sacrifices outside of the temple came in the time of Ezra. And I was not familiar with that concept. So is this correct?
What says in the Torah, it says that you will bring the sacrifice in the place that I will choose. And so it already had to be brought in the tabernacle at the time of the tabernacle, then it had to be brought in the times in Shiloh and when it was in Eretz Yisrael, in the Holy Land, and then it had to be only brought in Jerusalem. So I don't know what that person is referring to. You have to ask him for a source. Where does it say that? And I don't mean just the internet essay. I mean, what's the source for that internet essay?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, it's wonderful to see you all. Thank you for being here. And may we continue to learn together, and may we reach the point that says that when the Mashiach is going to come in the ultimate redemption, when it's going to progress through stages that you won't even need a teacher anymore, because we're all going to learn directly from God Almighty. That's what we're all praying for. And we will go from level to level of understanding in the infinite, and may we experience that right now.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Rabbi, for really encouraging message.
Well, thank God and thank God that God Almighty has shared it with us and shared it with us through the teachers of all the generations that have brought it down to this point in time, that we could have the merit to bring it to its final destination, which is that every single human being will be able to experience it and receive it. And I think that that's interesting. We'll just finish on this one note, that really the biggest screaming out of you're making a mistake is that we're making a mistake, and all of us are subject to make the mistake of having the illusion that we're separated from God Almighty. That's the ultimate mistake, and that's the core of everyone's mistake. And by letting everyone know that that's an innocent mistake, then we can all get back on track and know that we are not separate from God Almighty, and there's nothing besides God Almighty. So we do have the ultimate hopeful message. God bless you all. Thank you for being here.